Hi.
The morning that changed everything began like any other. I woke up to the soft hum of the alarm, rolled over, and glanced at the time. My wife, Lily, was already out of bed. The smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted up from the kitchen, mingling with the faint sound of the kids bickering over cereal. For years, this routine had been the backbone of our lives. Predictable, comforting, and safe, or so I thought. I made my way downstairs, greeted by the sight of Lily bustling around the kitchen. She was dressed impeccably, as usual, her smile warm and inviting as she handed me a cup of coffee. She kissed me on the cheek before returning to her tasks, seamlessly managing the chaos of breakfast while simultaneously packing lunches and checking her phone. She'd always had an air of competence that I admired, the way she could juggle the demands of work and family without missing a beat. By the time I left for work, the kids were already on their way to school, and Lily had disappeared into her home office. I kissed her goodbye, an automatic gesture that felt more like a habit than a conscious act. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but now, looking back, I realize how distant we had become. The little cracks in our relationship had been there all along, but I'd ignored them, too caught up in the rhythms of life to notice the void growing between us. Work that day was uneventful, a blur of meetings and paperwork that left me drained but relieved to be heading home. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Lily's car parked in the garage. She rarely stayed home during the afternoons, preferring the quiet of a coffee shop or the local library to get her work done. I shrugged it off, assuming she'd had a change in plans. But when I walked through the door, the atmosphere felt off, tense, almost suffocating. Lily was in the living room, her laptop open on the coffee table. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. She seemed distracted, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of a throw pillow. I asked if everything was okay, and she brushed off my concern with a wave of her hand, claiming she was just tired. I let it go, not wanting to push her, but the unease lingered, a small seed of doubt taking root in my mind. That night, as we lay in bed, I noticed her scrolling through her phone more than usual, her expression unreadable in the dim light. She turned away when I tried to engage her in conversation, claiming she had an early morning and needed to sleep. I chalked it up to stress, telling myself that everyone has off days and that it wasn't worth worrying about. Over the next few weeks, however, the distance between us grew. Lily became more secretive, her phone practically glued to her hand. She started spending more time out of the house, citing work meetings or errands that seemed to stretch longer than necessary. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut, convincing myself that I was overreacting. After all, we'd been married for over a decade, built a life together, and raised two incredible kids. Why would she jeopardize all of that? But the signs were impossible to ignore. Her laughter, once so genuine and contagious, now felt forced, like she was playing a role rather than being herself. She avoided eye contact during conversations, her answers short and evasive. And then there was the late-night texting. She claimed it was work-related, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. One evening, as she sat across from me at the dinner table, her phone buzzed incessantly. She glanced at the screen, her expression flickering with an emotion I couldn't quite place before she set the phone face down. The kids were chatting animatedly about their day, oblivious to the tension crackling between us. I forced a smile, joining in their conversation, but my mind was elsewhere, grappling with the questions I was too afraid to ask. It wasn't until a chance discovery that my suspicions were confirmed. I had come home early one afternoon, hoping to surprise Lily with lunch from her favorite cafe. As I walked through the front door, I heard her voice, low and urgent, coming from the kitchen. She was on the phone, her back turned to me as she spoke in hushed tones. I paused, torn between announcing my presence and eavesdropping. Curiosity won out, and I crept closer, straining to hear her words. What I heard made my stomach drop. She wasn't talking about work. The tone of her voice, the intimate way she spoke, was something I hadn't heard in years, not directed at me, at least. She mentioned a name I didn't recognize, her words filled with a familiarity that sent a chill down my spine. My chest tightened, anger and disbelief swirling inside me as I struggled to process what I was hearing. When she ended the call, I stepped into the room, startling her. She froze, her eyes wide with guilt and panic. She stammered an excuse, but her words rang hollow, a thin veil over the truth I could see so clearly. I didn't confront her then, too stunned to form coherent thoughts. Instead, I walked away, retreating to the bedroom to gather my composure. That night, as Lily slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with questions, each more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? Who was the man on the other end of the phone? And most importantly, why? What had I done or failed to do that pushed her away? The next day, I began to dig deeper. I checked her phone while she was in the shower, finding messages that confirmed my worst fears. The exchanges were casual yet intimate, filled with inside jokes and affectionate nicknames. They spoke of stolen moments and plans for the future, a stark contrast to the life we had built together. I felt a wave of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal. But beneath it all was a sense of determination. I couldn't let this define me or destroy my family. I had to confront the truth, no matter how painful, and decide what came next. As I stared at the messages, my hands trembling, I realized that this was just the beginning of a journey I never expected to take. A journey that would test my strength, my resolve, and my ability to rebuild a life shattered by betrayal. The days following my discovery were a blur of emotions and unanswered questions. Every glance at Lily felt like a test of my resolve. Should I confront her outright, pretend I didn't know, or quietly gather more evidence to understand the full scope of her betrayal? I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work. Every moment apart from her was consumed by thoughts of what I had uncovered and what it meant for our family. But amidst the chaos in my mind, one thing was clear. My children didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of whatever storm was brewing between Lily and me. Their laughter, their bright-eyed enthusiasm for life, was a beacon in the darkness that now clouded my home. For their sake, I decided to tread carefully. Lily, for her part, acted as though nothing was amiss. She maintained her usual routines, her demeanor warm and attentive when the kids were around. But when we were alone, there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. Perhaps she sensed my unease, or maybe she was preoccupied with her own guilt. Either way, the gap between us felt like a chasm I couldn't bridge. To keep my mind from spiraling further, I turned my attention to the messages I had found on her phone. The man's name, Eric, was unfamiliar to me. I searched for him online, piecing together a picture of who he was. He worked in real estate, lived in a neighboring city, and seemed, at least on the surface, to be an ordinary man. But what troubled me most was the sheer effort Lily had put into hiding her relationship with him. Their exchanges were carefully worded, with no explicit details that could give away their affair. It was clear they had been doing this for a while, long enough to develop a system of secrecy. I began to notice patterns in her behavior. She would leave the house on certain days under the pretense of work meetings or errands, her explanations vague but plausible. She always seemed to have her phone on her, even during family dinners or quiet evenings at home. And though she tried to act normal, there were moments when her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, when her laughter felt forced. One evening, as she left for what she claimed was a late-night meeting, I decided to follow her. My heart pounded as I trailed her car, careful to keep my distance. She drove to a restaurant on the edge of town, parking in a discreet corner of the lot. From my position across the street, I watched as she stepped out of the car and greeted Eric with a hug that lingered just a little too long. They went inside together, their body language speaking volumes about the nature of their relationship. I sat in my car, paralyzed by the confirmation of what I had already suspected. Seeing them together felt like a knife to the gut, the final blow in a series of small but devastating wounds. Part of me wanted to storm into the restaurant, to confront them both and demand an explanation. But the rational part of me held back, knowing that such a scene would only make things worse. Instead, I took a few photos with my phone, proof, should I need it later, and drove home. Back at the house, I sat in the dark, grappling with the weight of what I had seen. My mind raced with possibilities, each more painful than the last. Was this a fleeting affair, or something deeper? Did she love him? And, perhaps most heartbreakingly, Was there a chance that our marriage could survive this? The answers eluded me, lost in the labyrinth of my emotions. Over the next few days, I became more vigilant, watching Lily's every move with a sharpness that bordered on obsession. I combed through our shared financial records, looking for any signs of secret spending or unexplained transactions. What I found only deepened my suspicions. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and gas charges that didn't align with her usual patterns. Each piece of evidence felt like another crack in the foundation of our life together. But as much as I wanted to confront her, I hesitated. Part of me feared her reaction, the possibility that she might deny everything and turn the blame on me. Another part of me worried about what the confrontation would mean for our children. They were too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships, and I couldn't bear the thought of them being hurt by the fallout of Lily's choices. I confided in a close friend, Mark, who had been by my side through thick and thin. Mark listened patiently as I poured out my heart, his expression a mix of sympathy and quiet anger. He urged me to take my time, to think carefully about my next steps before making any decisions. His advice was a balm to my restless mind, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. In the days that followed, I began to piece together a plan. I needed to protect myself and my children, to prepare for whatever lay ahead. I consulted a lawyer, seeking advice on how to navigate the legal and financial implications of a potential separation. The process was sobering, a stark reminder of how much was at stake. But it also gave me a sense of control, a way to channel my anger and pain into something productive. As the weeks went on, I continued to gather evidence, each discovery reinforcing the reality I had been trying to avoid. I found a hidden email account on Lily's laptop, filled with messages to and from Eric. Their exchanges were intimate and playful, a stark contrast to the strained conversations Lily and I now shared. I also uncovered a second phone, tucked away in her car, which she used exclusively to communicate with him. The level of deception was staggering, a testament to how deeply she had invested in her double life. But amidst the heartbreak, there were moments of clarity, brief glimpses of hope that reminded me of what truly mattered. My children were my anchor, their laughter and unconditional love a source of strength in the midst of chaos. I began to focus on them more, pouring my energy into creating a sense of stability and normalcy. We went on weekend outings, played board games, and shared bedtime stories, each moment a reminder of the life I was fighting to protect. Through it all, I kept my growing knowledge of Lily's affair to myself, waiting for the right time to confront her. I knew that moment would come eventually, that I couldn't live in limbo forever. But for now, I was content to bide my time, to gather my strength and prepare for the difficult conversations that lay ahead. As I sat in the quiet of my home one evening, the kids tucked safely into bed, I realized that this was only the beginning of a long and painful journey. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, each decision carrying weighty consequences. But despite the uncertainty, one thing was clear. I would do whatever it took to protect my family and reclaim my happiness, even if it meant walking away from the life I had built with Lily. Little did I know, the twists and turns of this story were far from over. The tension in our home grew thicker with each passing day, like a storm cloud on the verge of breaking. Lily's behavior became increasingly erratic, her attempts to maintain a facade of normalcy crumbling under the weight of her secrets. She smiled less, avoided prolonged conversations, and often seemed lost in her own thoughts. The kids noticed too, their innocent questions about why Mom seemed so distracted cutting deeper than any accusation I could have made. But I remained silent, watching and waiting. The confrontation loomed large in my mind, a mountain I wasn't yet ready to climb. Instead, I focused on fortifying myself, ensuring that when the moment came, I would be prepared to face whatever truth she had to offer. In the meantime, I continued to dig deeper into Lily's double life. The messages, receipts, and hidden phone had painted a picture of her betrayal, but I needed to understand the full extent of it. I began tracking her movements more closely, noting the days and times she claimed to be at work or running errands. My efforts confirmed what I already suspected. She was spending more time with Eric than she cared to admit. One Friday evening, Lily announced that she had to attend a work-related networking event. Her explanation was plausible, her tone casual, but the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her nervousness. I nodded, feigning indifference, and wished her a good evening. As soon as she left, I arranged for Mark to come over and watch the kids. Then, I grabbed my coat and followed her. She drove to a hotel on the outskirts of town, parking in a secluded spot near the back entrance. I watched from a distance as she entered the building, my heart pounding in my chest. The weight of what I was about to confirm felt suffocating, but I forced myself to stay calm. I waited a few minutes before stepping out of my car and heading inside. The lobby was quiet, the dim lighting and soft music creating an atmosphere of calm that contrasted sharply with the storm raging inside me. I approached the front desk, pretending to inquire about a room while discreetly scanning the guest register. My heart sank when I saw Eric's name listed under one of the suites. The clerk's polite smile felt like a cruel mockery as I thanked him and walked away. I took the elevator to the floor listed on the register, each ding of the ascending floors echoing like a countdown. When I reached the suite, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door. I had no plan for what I would do if Lily opened it, no script to follow if Eric appeared. The confrontation I had been avoiding now stood before me, demanding to be faced. But before I could act, the door opened on its own. Eric stepped out, his expression startled as he saw me. He froze for a moment, then quickly closed the door behind him. His body language was defensive, his eyes darting between me and the elevator as though weighing his chances of escape. I didn't give him the opportunity. The conversation that followed was tense and clipped, filled with accusations and denials that only deepened my anger. Eric insisted that his relationship with Lily wasn't what it seemed, that there were circumstances I didn't understand. But his words rang hollow, each excuse fueling the fire of my betrayal. By the time he retreated back into the suite, slamming the door behind him, I felt no satisfaction, only a gnawing emptiness. I didn't confront Lily that night. When she returned home, her demeanor was calm, almost detached, as though she had left her guilt behind in that hotel room. I pretended to be asleep, listening to her soft footsteps as she moved through the house. The sound of her brushing her teeth, of the mattress shifting as she climbed into bed, felt unbearably normal. It was as though we were actors in a play, each performing our roles while the truth lay just beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed. The following weeks were some of the most difficult of my life. Knowing the truth and keeping it to myself felt like a poison slowly seeping through my veins. I found solace in small acts of defiance, subtle ways to reclaim a sense of control over my life. I began documenting everything. The messages, the receipts, the times and locations of her meetings with Eric. Each piece of evidence became a brick in the wall I was building to protect myself and my children. Mark remained a steady presence, offering advice and support without judgment. He urged me to confront Lily, to demand answers and take control of the situation. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Every time I imagined the confrontation, the potential fallout felt overwhelming. What would happen to the kids? To our home? To the life we had built together? My breaking point came one Saturday morning. Lily had left early, claiming she needed to catch up on work. The kids and I spent the day at the park, their laughter a brief reprieve from the turmoil in my mind. When we returned home, I found a note from Lily on the kitchen counter. She had left for the weekend. The note claimed, to attend a last-minute work retreat. The words were carefully chosen, her handwriting neat and deliberate, but I could see through the lie. I called Mark and asked him to come over again. When he arrived, I handed him a folder containing all the evidence I had gathered. He flipped through it in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm not sure," I admitted, "but I can't keep living like this." That night, I sat in the quiet of my home, the kids asleep upstairs, and made a decision. I would confront Lily when she returned, lay everything out on the table, and demand the truth. I couldn't change the past, but I could control how I responded to it. For the sake of my children and my own sanity, I needed to take that first step toward reclaiming my life. As I prepared for the confrontation, I felt a sense of clarity that had eluded me for weeks. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with pain and uncertainty. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it, whatever it might bring. Lily returned home late Sunday evening. Her demeanor relaxed and unhurried, as if she had been on an innocent work trip. She placed her overnight bag by the door, greeted the kids warmly, and slipped seamlessly back into her role as wife and mother. I watched her with a mix of anger and sorrow, knowing this facade couldn't last much longer. The confrontation I had been preparing for was imminent, and there was no turning back now. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat in the living room, the folder of evidence resting on the coffee table in front of me. Lily joined me, settling onto the couch with a book in hand. She glanced at me briefly, her expression unreadable, before turning her attention back to the pages. I cleared my throat, and her gaze flicked back to me, curiosity and a hint of apprehension in her eyes. I began by calmly stating what I had discovered. Her secret meetings, the messages, the hotel receipts. I laid it all out, each piece of evidence hitting her like a stone. Her initial reaction was shock, her face paling as she realized the depth of what I knew. She tried to deny it at first, her voice trembling as she grasped for excuses, but the weight of the proof left no room for doubt. Finally, she fell silent, her shoulders slumping as the fight drained out of her. The admission came haltingly, her words heavy with guilt and regret. She confessed to the affair, explaining that it had started months ago, born out of a combination of dissatisfaction and a desire for something new. Her words were a knife to the heart, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. I asked her why, demanded to know what I had done to drive her into the arms of another man, but her answers were vague and unsatisfying. She claimed it wasn't about me, that it had never been about me. It was a cliched response, but the sincerity in her voice was undeniable. She spoke of feeling trapped in the monotony of our life, of wanting to recapture the excitement and passion she felt she had lost. It wasn't an excuse, she admitted, but it was the truth. The conversation stretched long into the night, both of us grappling with the enormity of what had happened. I oscillated between anger and sadness, my emotions swinging wildly as I tried to process her betrayal. Lily begged for forgiveness, promising to end the affair and do whatever it took to rebuild our marriage. But her words felt hollow, the wounds too fresh for me to imagine a path forward. The next few days were a blur. I took time off work, needing space to think and process. Lily, true to her word, severed contact with Eric, sending him a terse message that left no room for ambiguity. She showed me the message, her hands trembling as she held the phone out for me to read. It was a small gesture, a tentative step toward rebuilding trust, but it felt woefully inadequate. Our home became a tense and fragile place, the air heavy with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. The kids, perceptive as ever, noticed the shift, their questions innocent but piercing. I did my best to shield them from the tension, putting on a brave face and maintaining routines, but the strain was evident. Lily and I spoke only when necessary, our conversations clipped and devoid of warmth. I sought solace in Mark, whose steady presence continued to be a lifeline. He listened patiently as I vented my frustrations and doubts, offering advice without judgment. He encouraged me to take things one step at a time, to focus on what was best for myself and the kids. His support was a reminder that I wasn't alone, even in the darkest moments. It was during one of these conversations with Mark that the idea of counseling came up. At first, I dismissed it, skeptical that a stranger could help untangle the mess Lily and I had created. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like a necessary step, if not to save our marriage, then at least to find some clarity and closure. Lily agreed to counseling without hesitation, her eagerness to make amends apparent. We began seeing a therapist weekly, the sessions both illuminating and excruciating. The therapist encouraged us to be honest, to confront the pain and resentment that had festered between us. Lily spoke of her feelings of inadequacy, her fear of losing herself in the roles of wife and mother. I shared my own struggles, the ways I had felt taken for granted and disconnected from her. The sessions were a roller coaster of emotions, each one peeling back layers of hurt and misunderstanding. Some days, it felt like we were making progress, finding common ground and rediscovering the love that had brought us together. Other days, It felt like we were spinning our wheels, trapped in a cycle of blame and defensiveness. Amidst the turmoil, I began to focus on myself. I started going to the gym, something I had neglected for years. I reconnected with old hobbies, spending hours painting and writing, activities that brought me a sense of peace and fulfillment. I spent more time with the kids, cherishing every laugh and hug as a reminder of what truly mattered. These small acts of self-care became a foundation on which I could rebuild my sense of identity and strength. Lily, too, made an effort to change. She became more present, putting her phone away during family time and engaging more with the kids. She planned date nights and wrote me letters, heartfelt apologies that expressed her regret and commitment to making things right. But despite her efforts, the trust between us remained fractured, a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. The turning point came during a counseling session in which the therapist asked us to envision our future. Where did we see ourselves in a year? In 5 years? The question forced us to confront the reality of our situation, to acknowledge that the path forward would require more than just words and promises. It would require a fundamental shift in how we communicated, how we prioritized each other, and how we approached the challenges of marriage. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't a certainty, but it was enough to keep me moving forward. Lily and I agreed to take things one day at a time, to focus on rebuilding trust and finding joy in the small moments. It was a fragile truce, but it was a start. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the steady rhythm of Lily's breathing, I realized that the journey ahead would be long and difficult. But for the sake of my children and the life we had built together, I was willing to try. The road to forgiveness was uncertain, but it was a road I was finally ready to take. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as Lily and I worked to navigate the fragile truce we had forged in therapy. Our relationship resembled a house under renovation. The structure remained, but the cracks were visible, and the repairs were slow, painstaking, and sometimes uncertain. Each conversation, each shared meal, felt like an exercise in walking a tightrope. Beneath the surface, the scars of her betrayal lingered, a reminder of the fragility of trust. The children became an anchor during this time, their laughter and boundless energy grounding me in the present. They were blissfully unaware of the undercurrents in our home, and I was determined to keep it that way. I threw myself into being the best father I could be, organizing weekend trips, helping with homework, and savoring the small joys of parenthood. For their sake, I kept going, even on the days when the weight of it all threatened to pull me under. Lily continued to make amends, her efforts sincere but often awkward. She planned date nights, cooked my favorite meals, and left handwritten notes around the house. Small gestures meant to convey her remorse and dedication. Yet, despite her actions, I struggled to fully let her back in. The memory of her betrayal loomed like a shadow, darkening even the brightest moments. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, sifting through old photo albums, I came across a picture of Lily and me from our honeymoon. We looked so young, so full of hope and possibility. I stared at the photo for a long time, the weight of nostalgia mingling with a deep sadness. How had we ended up here, so far from the people we once were? Could we ever find our way back? That night, I dreamed of a simpler time, of lazy Sundays spent in bed, of whispered secrets and shared laughter. When I woke, the dream lingered like a bittersweet melody, filling me with a strange mix of longing and resolve. I decided it was time to have an honest conversation with Lily, to confront the questions I had been avoiding since her confession. When I brought it up during our next counseling session, Lily seemed nervous but willing. We talked about the affair in detail, the why and the how, the choices that had led her down that path. It was excruciating, each revelation peeling back another layer of pain. But amidst the hurt, there were moments of clarity, moments that helped me understand the fractures in our relationship that had gone unnoticed for so long. Lily admitted that the affair had been a mistake, a desperate attempt to fill a void she hadn't known how to address. She spoke of her own insecurities, her fear of losing herself in the roles of wife and mother. Hearing her speak so vulnerably was both heartbreaking and illuminating. For the first time, I saw her not as the woman who had betrayed me, but as a person who was deeply flawed, just like me. The conversation marked a turning point, a shift in how I viewed our marriage and its future. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a single act but a process, one that required both of us to confront our pain and our shortcomings. It wouldn't be easy, and there were no guarantees, but I was willing to try. For myself, for Lily, and most importantly, for our children. As we moved forward, I began to focus on rebuilding not just our relationship but also myself. I joined a local running club, finding solace in the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement. I took up woodworking, spending hours in the garage crafting pieces that were both functional and symbolic of the rebuilding process. These activities became a source of strength, a reminder that I could create something new from the remnants of what had been broken. Lily, too, made changes. She started volunteering at a local community center, rediscovering a sense of purpose outside of our home. She attended individual therapy sessions, working to unpack her own issues and patterns. These changes, while small, gave me hope that she was committed to becoming a better version of herself. Not just for me, but for herself as well. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the kids play in the yard, Lily reached for my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. For the first time in months, I didn't pull away. We sat there in silence, the warmth of her hand in mine, a small but significant step toward healing. Despite these moments of progress, the road ahead remained challenging. There were days when the pain of her betrayal resurfaced, days when I questioned whether I could truly forgive her. But each time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the reasons I had chosen to stay, the love we had shared, the family we had built, and the possibility of creating something new together. As the months went on, our relationship began to stabilize. The walls between us started to come down, brick by brick, replaced by a newfound sense of honesty and vulnerability. We learned to communicate in ways we never had before, addressing issues head-on rather than letting them fester. It wasn't perfect, there were still arguments and moments of doubt, but it was progress. The true test of our renewed commitment came during our anniversary. Lily surprised me with a weekend trip to the cabin where we had spent our honeymoon. As we drove through the winding roads, memories of that time came flooding back, mingling with the present in a way that felt both surreal and hopeful. At the cabin, we spent hours talking, reminiscing about the past and dreaming about the future. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, a glimmer of the connection we had once shared. We wrote letters to each other, expressing our hopes and fears, our gratitude and regrets. Reading Lily's words, I felt a spark of the love that had brought us together all those years ago. As we stood on the cabin's porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, I realized that while our marriage would never be the same, it could still be something beautiful. The scars of her betrayal would always be there, but they didn't have to define us. We had the power to shape our future, to build something stronger and more resilient than what we had before. When we returned home, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey wasn't over, but I was ready to face it with an open heart and a willingness to grow. Lily and I had been through the fire, and while it had left its mark, it had also forged a deeper understanding of ourselves and each other. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that we could move forward, not as the people we once were, but as the people we were becoming. And in that hope, I found peace.
How was the video? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. Leave your thoughts in the comment below. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.